My name is Isabella, and just a year ago, I was an ordinary woman living an ordinary life. I worked long shifts at a small town cafe, paying bills paycheck to paycheck, and secretly dreaming of something more. My world was small but stable, or at least I thought it was. I never imagined that one phone call, one letter, and one horrifying night would shatter everything I knew and replace it with a life that was both breathtakingly rich and unbearably painful. It all began with the inheritance. I never thought much about my Uncle Richard. He was my father's older brother, a man who had moved to another state years before I was even born. We weren't close. He was one of those family members you only hear about during Christmas stories. Rich, eccentric, and too busy to visit. So when I got the call that he had passed away, I felt a faint, polite sadness, but nothing more. What I didn't expect was the lawyer's next words. "Miss Isabella, your uncle left you as the sole heir to his estate. You've inherited approximately $11 million. My first reaction was disbelief. Me? The struggling waitress who lived in a cramped apartment and worried about rent every month? Suddenly, I was rich. I hung up the phone and just sat there, staring at the peeling wallpaper in my kitchen, thinking maybe it was some kind of cruel mistake. But it wasn't. Days later, I was in a lawyer's office, signing documents that changed my life forever. At first, it felt like magic. I paid off my debts in one stroke. I moved into a beautiful house with tall windows that let in the morning sun. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to count pennies before buying groceries. My friends congratulated me, my coworkers envied me, and even my estranged relatives started calling out of nowhere, suddenly eager to reconnect. But money doesn't erase loneliness, and wealth, I quickly learned, brings new shadows into your life. One of those shadows was Daniel, my husband.
We met before the inheritance. Back then, he was charming, attentive, and he made me feel seen in a way no one else ever had. When the money came, he swore nothing would change between us. He promised he loved me for me, and I wanted so badly to believe him. I clung to the idea that this was my fairy tale, that I had found both love and fortune in one lifetime. But love is tested in ways you never expect. The night of the crash is etched into my memory with painful clarity. It was raining, the kind of storm where the roads shine like black glass and the streetlights blur through your windshield. Daniel and I were driving back from a dinner party. He was unusually quiet, his knuckles tight on the steering wheel. I asked him if everything was okay, and he muttered something about stress. I thought he meant work. I didn't know the truth until much later. At 11:47 p.m., a truck swerved into our lane. I remember the screech of tires, the violent spin of the car, and the sound of glass shattering like ice around me. My body was thrown against the seatbelt with bone-crushing force. Then, darkness. When I woke up in the hospital, everything was blurry. My head pounded, my body ached, and my mind kept replaying the impact over and over again. Daniel was there by my side, holding my hand. He told me I was lucky to be alive. The car was totaled, but somehow we both survived. At first, I believed him when he said it was just a tragic accident, but whispers started surfacing. My aunt hinted that Daniel had been reckless with money. A friend confessed she'd seen him in places he shouldn't have been, with people he shouldn't have met. Then, one night, when I thought he was asleep, I saw messages on his phone. Conversations about money, about insurance, about timing. That's when the real cracks began to show. I started to see the inheritance differently. It wasn't just wealth, it was a curse. People looked at me not as Isabella, the woman who once served them coffee, but as Isabella, the millionaire. Every conversation, every smile, every hug carried the question, what can I get from her? Even Daniel, the man who had once made me laugh until I cried, seemed to have turned into a stranger. The crash became a metaphor for my life, sudden, violent, leaving me broken and unsure who I could trust.
Recovery wasn't just about healing from the physical injuries.
It was about piecing together my shattered sense of safety. I had to ask myself hard questions. Who was really there for me? Who loved me for me and not for the fortune I never asked for? There were nights when I sat alone in my enormous, silent house, staring at the walls and wondering if I would have been happier without the money. At least then, the people around me were genuine, even if life was hard. Now, life was easier in some ways, but infinitely lonelier in others. The struggles after the inheritance weren't just about betrayal and doubt. They were about learning to survive emotionally. I began going to therapy, confronting not only the trauma of the accident, but the trauma of realizing that love, family, and friendship could be poisoned by greed. I thought about giving it all away. At one point, I even started the process of setting up a charity, just so I wouldn't feel the weight of it crushing me. But my therapist told me something that stuck. It's not the money that changed you, it's the way people changed around you. Don't punish yourself for their choices. Slowly, I began to rebuild. I distanced myself from Daniel, who eventually left when he realized I wasn't going to hand over everything blindly. I cut ties with relatives who only called when they needed something. And I started focusing on what the money could do, not for them, but for me. I went back to school, studied something I had always loved but could never afford, art history. I traveled, not to escape, but to learn and heal. I started helping quietly, donating anonymously to causes that mattered to me. But no matter how much time passes, the crash stays with me. Sometimes I still hear the screech of tires in my dreams. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, reaching for breath. That night taught me more than just how fragile life is. It taught me that even when everything shatters, bones, trust, relationships, you can still stand up again. My life changed overnight, yes. But the true change wasn't the inheritance, or the crash, or even the struggles after. The true change was inside me. I am no longer the woman who lived paycheck to paycheck, nor the naive girl who believed money solved everything. I am someone stronger, someone who has faced the darkest parts of love and survival, and walked out still standing. And if you're listening to my story, I want you to remember this. Wealth doesn't define you. Trauma doesn't destroy you. And the people who betray you don't get to write your ending. You do. So here I am, still Isabella, but reborn in ways money could never buy. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Your thoughts mean more to me than you know.